Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And I'm absolutely thrilled today to have with me Pauley Tamez. Pauley, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us today.
Thank you for having me here today, Tom.
So, Pauley, tell us about your journey in art. Did you wake up when you were four and just start drawing? Did you have a crazy uncle who took you to a class? Did you pick it up later in life? What's your origin story?
I'm not really sure the origin, but I do remember I was talking to my mother the other day and I asked her, Mom, do you remember when I started um, drawing? And she said, Oh, you've drawn ever since you were a little bitty boy. And, but I do remember this at age 7, I got a watercolor set for Christmas. I think it was for either Christmas or my birthday. They're real close together. And I figured out real quick that I could paint the little pictures that I like to draw. And it just took off from there. So back then I was doing my dad was in the Air Force and I did airplanes and cars and drag racers and animals, things like that. But that's when I started doing that. And I got real interested in doing the landscape also because we lived in France and Germany. And before we moved here, I was up in the Midwest before my dad retired from the Air Force and moved us down to San Antonio. So I got to see a lot of different landscapes and was just fascinated by it.
Did you live in Wiesbaden?
Yes, no, we lived in Ramstein, which is
Ramstein.
very close.
Go to
Uh,
school in Ramstein?
I did.
I did.
Yeah.
Had an ex-wife that went to school in
Oh.
Ramsey. That's why I know that. When did you end up in either San Antonio or the Hill Country area?
I grew up in San Antonio after my dad retired. I was in 4th grade and he retired. We moved to San Antonio. I grew up there, wound up leaving in 1976. I joined the Coast Guard. And from there, I came back after I got out of the Coast Guard. I came back to San Antonio and then moved up to Central Texas, up a little bit north of Austin in the Temple area. And I worked there. I met my wife. We got married. We worked there for almost 30 years before I moved back to this area. And I really wanted to move to the hill country because I wanted to paint the hill country.
I would certainly second that. Where did you end up relocating to?
So I live in Bernie, and my wife told me that any we could move to Central Texas. We were moving away from her family, but anything inside 1604 would be a deal breaker. So I thought about Kerrville, thought about Comfort, and I remember when I was in high school, I used to hitchhike from San Antonio up here to Kerrville and to Comfort and Bernie so that I could find places to paint. So we decided, I thought, yeah, Bernie's a really cool little town. Why don't we check Bernie out? And we happened to come down here on a weekend when Bernie was having their market days. And my wife just fell in love with Bernie. So we moved to Bernie.
So tell us about did you study art in high school? Did you have any chance to do it in the Coast Guard or in your professional career?
Never had any formal study of art. I painted a lot. My first painting I sold was when I was in the Coast Guard and I was in Hawaii. I was doing some beautiful seascapes and primarily working in watercolor back then. It's just watercolor is such an interesting portable medium. You can have a little tiny watercolor set that you can put in your pocket and you can paint anywhere. So I did a lot of watercolors back then in the 70s. And so let's get back to the question that you asked me. I went off there.
No, there's no going off or
Okay.
on this podcast. There's only the pod.
Okay.
The conversation. So, what I'd ask you was about your art career, either in high school or in the Coast Guard. And you mentioned that you started or you were painting while you were in the Coast Guard. Made your first sale when you were in the Coast Guard. Were you able to continue sort of the amateur love of painting in that part of your career and then your professional career in Central Texas?
Absolutely. So I've always painted. I've been painting all my life, and it really started to take off in 2004 when I lost my dad. Right, my dad had terminal cancer, and when he was diagnosed, I knew that my time was going to be short with him. And I was visiting with him one evening. He got up from the table. He said, "Wait a minute, I got something for you." And he went over to his closet and he pulled out a stack of watercolor paintings that I had done back in the 70s. And my dad never encouraged me to be an artist. I was a financial planner. He wanted me to make money, and he didn't think art was the way for me to do it. So, I kinda followed in his footsteps. He was in the insurance business, and I went into the insurance business, and then I got my securities licenses and did financial planning for about 30, close to 38 years. But dad came out with a stack of watercolor paintings that just really surprised me that he had saved those from the 70s when I was in high school and college. And he gave me these paintings and said, "You should start doing this again." So when he died, my catharsis was painting. I started to paint even more then. And I realized that painting was a way for me to not only express myself, but also to relieve my pain, my depression, and to process my grief. And it just took off from there. So when I moved to Bernie, I met a group of artists at an art gallery, and I looked at these beautiful large oil paintings that were 3 or 4, 5, sometimes 6 feet wide, huge oil paintings. And they were a lot of them were of the Texas Hill Country, which I wanted to do, but I couldn't afford them. They were 30, $40,000. And I thought, I've got the talent inside me. I can do this. I want to paint like that. One of those artists I met was a guy named Bill Zaner. Bill was close to he was close to 80 when I met him. And he had these beautiful paintings hanging in the gallery. And I asked him, "Bill, will you teach me how to paint?" And he said, "No." Just like that. "No, I don't." So I met Bill. I asked him, "Would you teach me how to paint?" And he said, "No." Just like that. "No." And I was kind of taken aback from it. And he goes, "I don't teach anymore. I don't have the patience for it." I knew Bill painted every day. I knew he had the discipline of painting every day. And at that time, I had a job and I couldn't go to his studio during the week. But I said, "Bill, I have weekends off. Would it be okay for me to visit you in your studio and just watch you paint? I'll sit in the corner. I won't say anything. I just want to watch you paint." And he thought a minute and he goes, "Sunday is my day to entertain people. So if you'll show up on Sunday in the afternoon after I've had my nap, you can watch me paint and bring wine." So I said, "Okay, I will." So for the next 5 years, I sat in his studio every Sunday, watched him paint. He allowed me to ask him questions. Sometimes he would just turn around and say, and tell me what he was doing. And I learned so much from him. He taught me so much. And then he invited me to come to Big Bend with him. And he told me, If you've never been there, this is going to change your DNA." I said, "Okay." So I started going to Big Bend with him, wound up going with him twice a year for 5 years until he died. He passed away about 7 years ago. And during those times, Bill would watch me paint. And Bill would watch me paint and he would give me pointers on what I should do to kind of help my painting a little bit. We would also be the first two people to wake up in the morning. We would go with a group of artists, and we were always the first ones to wake up. And where we stayed when we went to Big Bend is in Terlingua, and we had this beautiful view of the Chizos Mountains looking From our viewpoint, we were looking east. So we would get up before the sunrise, have our cup of coffee, and we would talk about the colors that were changing and happening during the sunrise. And I would ask him, Bill, how would you paint that pink right there? And the good coach that he was, he would ask me, how would you paint it? What colors would you use? A- And he really would dig this, he would dig this out of me. I would have to really think, what colors would I use to produce this color that I'm seeing? And he was like that. He If I was stuck on a painting and I would ask him a question, he would ask me right back, "How would you do it?" And I'd have to think about it. So Bill taught me a whole lot about painting, and he really helped me develop into the type of landscape artist that I wanted to be. But I wanted to do more. There was something beyond that, and I learned that I could be a very good landscape artist, but I wanted to do more. And then I lost Bill. So I'm happy that in that time period, I also met another dear friend of mine, David Caton, who's a painter that lives in Utopia. He's also a landscape artist. We've continued to, I meet with David every Tuesday on the telephone. We have a 2-hour conversation every Tuesday afternoon, and we talk about art. We talk about painting. We talk about art history. We talk about color. Sometimes we talk about food and other things, but we mainly focus on art. And David has helped me to continue to develop myself as an artist.
So I had the opportunity to look at some of the landscapes on your website, and I wanted to start by asking you, do you see the scene? Do you see it in your head? Do you take a picture of it? Do you draw it? How do you translate what you see onto your canvas?
That's an excellent question. And I'll tell you the answer to that is all of the above. A lot of the paintings I do out in the field in plein air, I do as small sketches where it may be an 8 by 10 or 9 by 12 or 11 by 14 support canvas. I'll do that out in the field, and then I'll go into my studio and I'll translate it into a larger painting. A lot of the times, so plein air, the light changes very quickly. So I have to think very quickly. And Bill taught me how to do this. He taught me how to paint quickly. I have to make color notes on my painting, mix the color real fast, the color I want, and I'll put it on my painting, and then I'll come back to that and I'll finish it. So if there's a particular color in the sky or light that's uh, raking across the land, I've got to get that on the canvas right away, and then I can take that into the studio, remembering what I saw, and translate that into something larger. But I do use photographs also. I use photographs for, especially if I'm doing landscape out in a place like Big Bend, I want the topographical reference. Now, a lot of times my paintings will turn into the topography is right, but I want a different sky on there, or I want different light in there. Maybe the light wasn't quite so good, or maybe it was a cloudy day, and I want to make it look like there's strong light coming from the east or the west. So, to answer your question, I do all of the above.
We're recording this in mid February, and I wanted to ask you about the colors. I'm going to go through the year, but right now I'm going to focus on January and February. We had a lot of rain in 2024. So, at least the part of the hill country I live in, we were green for a long time, and we've been green into the winter. And I wanted to ask you to describe the greens you see in the winter, and then we'll move to the rest of the year.
So, greens in the winter tend to have a lot of ochre, yellow ochre, a lot of light browns. The greens may even have some red around them. They're not as bright as spring greens when we have a lot of new growth. That's a great question because color means so much when you're putting it on canvas, and to translate what you see, it requires the artist to think about what colors am I going to use to produce green. I don't use green out of a tube. In fact, I don't even have a green tube in my palette. I use blues and yellows and oranges, and I use lots of different colors, but the winter colors tend to have a lot of yellow in them. And when I say yellow, there's so many shades of yellow. I'm talking about the darker shades of yellow, the cooler yellows.
The as we move into spring and we have literally in my mind an explosion of many different colors, how do you translate what you've experienced in winter into do you literally have an explosion in your head? Do you see some people see it as a rebirth of the Easter season and all of that? How do you feel about that as an artist, and how do you translate that feeling onto your canvas?
Again, color has a lot of significance. There's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Colors mean different things. So when I think of spring colors, I'm thinking of new life. So there's a lot of vibrant colors. There's oranges and reds and yellows and purples, and it's not just green. There's so much life out there. And when you look at a landscape to see these new colors popping out, especially when there's a lot of light, when there's sunshine, the best lights in the morning or in the evening, right before sunrise or right after sunrise and right before sunset. That beautiful, I can't think of the word now. That light that's just uh, right before the sun goes down. It's just a beautiful light. It produces that kind of a red glow, kind of an orangey glow and it really brightens up the landscape.
Last summer was really special for me because of the rain amount of rain we had. At least in my part of the hill country, it never got brown. And typically by August, we're looking at a lot of brown, but I saw lots of different colors that I don't see in August. What was it like for you?
Wasn't that it, we had a really nice summer. There was a lot of green in the landscape, but I did spend a lot of time out in West Texas in the summer. I like going out to West Texas in the summer because it's so dang hot and nobody else is out there. So here in this area, I didn't paint as much in the hill country as I painted out in West Texas. So I can't really translate that.
We can explore West Texas because I've also had that journey to Big Bend, through Fort Stockton, through Fort Davis, through Alpine, through Marfa on the way to the park itself. And first of all, I lived in Texas all my life. I never knew we had mountains. And when I saw those mountains, I was just stunned because I saw darks in a way that had beauty I'd never seen. So, what are your thoughts on either the Davis Mountains or the West Texas that you painted last summer?
So I was fortunate enough to go to the Davis Mountains and also go to Big Bend, the national park and the state park, and all that road in between. There's so much life out there that a lot of people go out there and think, this is desert. Why am I out here? There's nothing to see. But there is so much life in the desert. The Ocotillos during that time are have the red plumes on them. If you get out there early enough, like even now, the Big Bend bluebonnets are blooming and those things can get 3 feet tall. They're just beautiful. But later in the summer, like I was there in June, I was there in July, and I made a trip at the end of August. That time of the year is generally what they call the rainy season. So it'll rain in the afternoon, but during the day, it's just deathly hot. You get a little bit of rain in the afternoon, and usually that rain you see off at a distance. Sometimes it gets on top of you, but a lot of times it's out in the distance, which creates some really nice contrast and some really dark skies and some really dark mountains. So that's what I see out there during the summer.
As we move into the fall, we're not New England, so we don't have vibrant oranges and yellows and reds, but we do have a different set of colors. What do you see in the autumn?
Oh, I see a lot of those oranges and reds. in the hills. So we have the Texas, the red oaks that turn colors. We have the cottonwoods that turn colors. There's some other trees also that the Texas plum, the Mexican plum trees also that are very native to this area. They'll change colors in the fall. So when you look at these green hills that typically are a dark green, those cedar trees that a little bit darker, and then you see the kind of the ochre green oak trees that contrast the cedar trees. Dotted among those are all those red oaks and some maples. There's some maples that are native to this area. The cypress trees, beautiful along the Guadalupe River that turn that bright red color. There's a lot of color in the fall here. Just got to look for it.
Paulie, do you have any upcoming shows you could tell our audience about?
Interesting you asked me that. I decided last year was kind of a discovery year for me. It was the first year I stepped away from the workforce. I retired and decided to become a full-time painter. So I did a lot of shows last year. And I decided this year I'm not going to be doing any shows. I love to do live painting, and you can find me here at River's Edge at least once a month doing a live painting. I have one coming up on the 19th. So, really, as far as shows go, I like to paint live. And if you want to see me come paint live, then come out to River's Edge on a Wednesday afternoon.
Unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, I did want to ask if our listeners wanted more information on you, perhaps to see your gallery virtually, what would be the best place or places for them to go?
My website is PTAMEZ, Tamez, art.com. I keep my website up to date. There's well over 500 paintings that you can see, and it's separated in. I do also do abstract art, so I've got my abstracts on there, my landscapes, my watercolors, my florals. They're all separated by sections. And then River's Edge Gallery here in Kerrville represents me, so my art can be seen there. Cibolo Creek Brewing Company in Bernie. I've been in there for 6 years, sold a lot of art out of there. And then Lost Oak Winery in Bernie also has my art.
Paulie, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with us and hope we can continue this conversation.
Thank you, Tom. I'd love to come back.